History remembers wars, explosions, and speeches. But sometimes, what saves the world is something far quieter. A phone call. A moment of communication that arrives just in time. In October 1962, the world stood on the edge of nuclear annihilation during what became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States discovered that the Soviet Union had secretly placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from American shores. These missiles were capable of reaching major U.S. cities in minutes. For President John F. Kennedy, this discovery was not just a threat. It was a nightmare scenario. If the missiles became operational, the balance of power would shift overnight. And if the United States attacked Cuba, the Soviet Union could retaliate in Europe. Nuclear war was no longer theoretical. It was imminent. Both superpowers began preparing for the worst. American nuclear forces were placed on high alert. Soviet commanders were instructed to be ready. Military advisors on both sides pushed for aggressive responses. The most terrifying part was not the weapons. It was the silence at the height of the crisis. Communication between Washington and Moscow was painfully slow. Messages took hours to arrive. Some were misunderstood. Others arrived late. In a world where missiles could cross oceans in minutes, leaders were communicating at the speed of paper and couriers. Fear filled the gap where clarity should have been. As the days passed, tension escalated rapidly. American naval forces established a blockade around Cuba, stopping Soviet ships suspected of carrying military equipment. Each encounter at sea carried the risk of misunderstanding. One wrong move, one misinterpreted action, could trigger a chain reaction no one could stop. Inside the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev faced enormous pressure. Military leaders urged him not to back down. To retreat would be seen as weakness. In the United States, Kennedy faced similar pressure. Some advisors openly suggested launching airstrikes or invading Cuba. Both sides believed they were acting defensively. Both sides believed the other might strike. First, on October 27th, later called Black Saturday, the situation reached its most dangerous point. A U.S. spy plane was shot down over Cuba. Another American aircraft accidentally entered Soviet airspace. Soviet submarines, carrying nuclear torpedoes, were surrounded by U.S. ships and subjected to depth charges. In one submarine, Soviet officers debated whether the war had already begun. Launching a nuclear torpedo seemed justified. Only the refusal of one officer prevented catastrophe. The world did not know it yet, but humanity was surviving on hesitation and luck. What was missing was direct communication, a way for leaders to clarify intentions instantly. Without it, fear filled the void. Behind closed doors, Kennedy and Khrushchev began exchanging letters. These messages were emotional, contradictory, and sometimes confusing. One Soviet letter appeared conciliatory. Another, sent shortly after, was far more aggressive. Which message represented the real intention? The delay between sending and receiving these letters made the situation even more dangerous. Decisions were being made based on outdated information. By the time a response arrived, the reality on the ground had already changed. Eventually, through intense diplomacy and indirect communication, a deal was reached. The Soviet Union agreed to remove its missiles from Cuba. In return, the United States promised not to invade Cuba and secretly agreed to remove its own missiles from Turkey. Nuclear war was avoided, but the leaders of both nations were shaken. They realized something deeply unsettling. The world had come terrifyingly close to destruction, not only because of weapons, but because of miscommunication. After the crisis ended, both sides acknowledged a painful truth: the lack of a direct, reliable communication channel between the United States and the Soviet Union had nearly destroyed the world. Fear traveled faster than understanding, and fear, in a nuclear age, is deadly. In response to this realization, a historic decision was made. In 1963, the United States and the Soviet Union established a direct communication link between Washington and Moscow. This system became known as the hotline. Despite popular belief, it was not a red phone on a desk. It was initially a teletype system, later upgraded to fax and eventually secured digital communication. Its purpose was simple but vital: to allow leaders to communicate instantly during crises. Without delay or intermediaries, the hotline was never meant for casual conversation. It existed for moments when minutes could mean millions of lives. Its creation represented a silent admission by both sides that they could no longer afford misunderstandings. Over the years, the hotline was used during several international crises, including wars in the Middle East and other Cold War confrontations. Each time, it served as a reminder of what almost happened in 1962. The existence of the hotline did not eliminate conflict, but it reduced the risk of accidental apocalypse. Communication became a weapon against fear. The Cuban Missile Crisis changed how the world understood power. It showed that strength without communication is dangerous, that systems and weapons mean nothing if leaders cannot speak clearly to each other. The crisis also revealed something uncomfortable. Humanity survived not because of perfect planning, but because people hesitated, questioned assumptions, and eventually chose dialogue over destruction. Today, nuclear weapons still exist, global tensions still rise, technology has advanced, but human psychology remains fragile. Fear, pride, and misunderstanding continue to shape decisions. The hotline still exists in modern forms, expanded to include other nations and emergency channels. It stands as a quiet monument to a lesson learned the hard way. Sometimes, the difference between peace and extinction is not a missile defense system or a military strategy. It is a message sent in time, a voice on the other end, a phone call that says, "Let's talk before it's too late." And because the lesson was learned, millions of lives were saved. If you want more true stories like this, stories that reveal how close the world has come to ending, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who enjoys deep historical curiosities.